Hello, welcome back to another Fabulous on my channel. Today we're going to be talking about my most favorite, the top 10 books of the year, plus, how many honorable mentions do I have here? I have 3 honorable mentions, as well. Now, the parameters, because I did read 203 books as of today, which is December 31st, and any book I ever give a 5-star, I automatically recommend. It's a book that's very decisive, under the lines of like trigger warnings or stuff like that contains lots of graphic content. I always recommend before you read it to look it up. But other than that, I recommend it. My 4s and 5s I tend to recommend. 3s are okay, and those tend to go into those are more disappointing or just average. I don't really remember them. And then 2s and 1s are books I really didn't like. 1s are like books I hated, and I only had one of those books this year. I give 1s out, like, it's very hard for you to get a 1. So if you got a 1, I feel bad. Okay. I have 4 books that I would count as my favorite book of the year. I'm very sorry. I tried really, really hard to pick one. And I couldn't get around to rereading all of them. And so I have 4 books that are my favorite out of the year. Okay? So we're just going to go in order. There is no number 1 in this section. Everything else is like, they're great, but they're like not as good as these, if we're pitting them up against each other. The first one will be the Anti-Virginity Pact by Katie Weismer, which I think my read will happen in March when the companion comes out. That companion comes out March 30th. This follows Meredith as she is dealing with normal high school life, but also she and her best friend sign an anti-virginity pact to lose their virginity by the end of their senior year, and her side of the pact goes out. And shit happens. It's phenomenal. It's a self-pub book. It's by an author tube here on the channel I've talked about quite a few times. I have reviews for this book. If I have reviews for any of these books, I'll link them down below. But I have a review for this book. I highly, highly recommend it. It's phenomenal. Pick it up. It's digitally, and it's not. Also, if you pick it up right now before the new cover comes out, you get like an exclusive. The next one's also by Katie Weismer, and that is For Poems to the End of the World. If you guys do not know, one of my favorite books of all time is The Sweetest Kind of Poison, which was Katie's first book. She released it back in 2018, and this was her second poetry collection. The first bit has a continuation into From Sweetest Kind of Poison onward, but for Poems to the End of the World, I got an art copy. I got an art copy, actually, of both of these, and they're just so phenomenal. I love them so much. There's certain poems in here that are just so freaking beautiful. Like, poems I get, like, I don't know. It's hard because I wouldn't say I'd get a whole poem tattooed on my body because that seems like it would hurt. But there are lines in here that just speak miles and miles. I have a whole reading stuff on this as well. Any of those, like I said, I'll link down below. The next one is The Invisible Life. I think I reviewed all 4 of my favorite books, so I'll link all those. The next one is The Invisible Life of Adelaide Louv by V.E. Schwab. This is about a girl who is cursed, and for 300 years, no one can see her. Well, they see her, but as soon as she walks away, or they walk away, or they turn their head, she's forgotten. And until one day, she is not. And that's all I'm going to tell you. I've realized, one, that V.E. Schwab is a very loved author, and as the book has gotten legs since its release in October, a lot of people have started to like it. I also know people who really didn't like the book. It's quite slow, you know, I'll admit it, but it was by far one of my best reading experiences I've had this year. I couldn't recommend this enough. This is my first V.E. Schwab, and every video I would talk about, I always ask, is there any V.E. Schwab you would recommend off of this one? And the most popular one is Vicious, and so that will be on my list for 2021 reads. Alright, let's move on from that. We're going to pop up the other book. I don't own all of these. I will be owning it. I just don't own it yet. And that is He Started It by Samantha Downing. He started it, oh my gosh. It's not an exact 5 stars, which is why it's a little bit further. It's the last one on the list. Actually, I could have gave it a 5, but in reality, it's like a 4.95. The ending is a little distasteful, and I need to re-listen to it to really get the impact of it again. But my God, do I love this book. This follows a group of, like, siblings who go on a road trip from hell because of money at the very end that their grandpa on their will said was there. And so we go back between 2 timelines, one when they already went on the road trip when they're like 13, and one in future days where they're like 26 to 30 something years old. It's a wild ride. There's a lot of death. It's great. It's by far the best thriller I've read this year. I don't think I have another thriller No. This is the only thriller that made it onto the list. So, yeah. It's phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough. Like, truly cannot recommend. The next one we're going to talk about is Lily Reinhart's Swimming Lessons, which I've also talked about on my channel. I didn't do a review for it. I read this 5 times this year, I think, which is crazy. Now, these are poetry collections, and so, but this is the only poetry collection that I can very promisingly remember where I read it once, and then I picked it up and I read it again. And I read it again. Because it was just so beautiful. It was exactly what I wanted. But anyway, this, I don't even know how to, I'll just read you the poem that they tell you to read on the back. I seem to be your new favorite novel, one that keeps you up all night, turning my pages, fingers linger on me so you don't lose your place. Yeah, it's just a whole bunch of different love stories, I guess. Not really. I don't really know. There's also pictures in it, which are really, really pretty. I just really recommend it. It's really, really cute. I really like it. I think it's a great first collection. I can't wait for more, if there is another. We have Again But Better by Christina Ricco. This was my first time reading it, and I had started when it came out in 2018, and a lot of people gave a lot of Christina Ricco a lot of shit because of the character of Shane. Shane is a 20-something-year-old. I think she's 18 when the novel starts, or maybe 17, due to if you want to get into the YA section, and then she's like 23 when the second part of the novel takes place. And this follows a girl who is down on her luck, and she tries something crazy, and she ends up going and studying abroad, and then some magical realism happens, and she gets to do it again, but better. I got a personal copy of this. It is signed by Christina Ricco, which I just adore. I'm trying to figure out how I can get a signed copy of her newest book. This was also one of those books, again, where I had a lot of struggle. I think it's a 4.35. I think on Goodreads it's technically a 5-star. But the character of Shane, her anxiety that she handles within the first, I would say 200 pages of the novel, was so realistic to my own personal anxiety that I deal with that I just loved it. I also absolutely love Christine. I'm a huge supporter, huge fan. She brings me so much joy, and she brings me so much inspiration to write and things that I didn't really mind the similarities between her and her main character here. I mean, I put myself in my character. I'm sure my first book that I ever wrote, this was her first book she ever wrote, I put myself there, you know? It just happened to be her first book that it ended up getting published and stuff. So yeah, I really liked it. Say what you will. It's up to you. I don't really care. Next 2 books are Cassie Clare books, so I can tell you what the series are about. I can't really tell you why I gave them the ratings that they got. So the first one we're going to talk about is City Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. City Heavenly Fire is book 6 in the Mortal Instruments. Technically you need to read this 9 or 10 books into it, but either way, it's book 6 if you're just reading the Mortal Instruments. It's the conclusion to that series. And I've talked about this a lot on my channel. The first 3 books of the Mortal Instruments are basically okay. The last 3 books of the Mortal Instruments are pretty freaking phenomenal, including City Heavenly Fire. City Heavenly Fire is a funny conversation because unlike City of Lost Souls, which almost made the list, it didn't even make an honorable mention. I almost love that whole entire book with its character development. This one, I was struggling for a long time with. I liked it, but I didn't love it, and then the final 300 pages happened, and then my mind was blown, and I was like, yeah, this is everything I ever wanted. And so I'm really excited to reread it whenever I get the chance. I've not finished with the Mortal Instruments yet, and so I can't reread books yet, you know what I mean, in the series. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was phenomenal. I highly recommend it. Sophie Turner read it to me, which is also really great. I think it is a nice setup for the Dark Artifice as well, and yeah, really, really liked it. Got the 5 stars because of the last 200 pages. The next one is Clockwork Angel, which is the first book in the Infernal Devices, which follows Tessa. She goes to London looking for her brother, and, well, some weird shit happens. The beautiful thing about, I think, Clockwork Angel, it's the only good thing I can say about any books that are on this list that are Cassie Clare's that pops up everywhere. This is the only book from point A to point B made the absolute sense. And by that, I mean there's just one cohesive storyline. It's not until you get to book 2, which is not my favorite, Clockwork Angel. Clockwork Prince, and Clockwork Princess came back, and it came back strong, and it was, like, phenomenal. But with Clockwork Prince, it's a simple story that you can get behind, and you root behind. The characters are phenomenal, and even if you do know who the end games are, you still are rooting for everybody, and yeah, I think it's great. It's also another great portrayal. It's not the best portrayal I've seen of a blood triangle, but it's one of my favorite portrayals I've ever seen of a love triangle, with her, Jem, and Will. Tesla, Jem, and Will. We have The Wicked King by Holly Black. Oh my god. You know, here's the problem with The Wicked King by Holly Black. I knew it had to be on this list. There was no part of me that was like, I can't skip that. But there was a tiny bit part of me that's like, do I love it because it is the middle novel? And the first one's okay, and the third one is disappointing. Didn't make any... Actually, I think Queen of Nothing should be in my most disappointing list. But it's fine. So what do I do with this? You know, I gave it 5 stars. I thought everything about this book was phenomenal. The characters, the loveness, the hatred, the pain, the torture, the story, the writing. I thought it worked. And the best way I can talk about it is in spoilery details, and I'll put that spoilery log down below. The next one we're going to talk about is literally like 20 pages. I'm not even joking you. Yeah, they're one of those made it to the list. It's a graphic novel. It's the only one that made the list this year. And has Harley Quinn, black and white, issue number 1, which is a valuation of Harleen, which is another thing I highly recommend. Harleen is phenomenal, especially if you're big in DC characters and you like amazing artwork. This one particularly takes place after the events of Harleen. It's like a continuation of Harleen, and it follows her in Poison Ivy. And to be honest with you, it's just it's amazing. Yeah, that's all I gotta say on that. Alrighty, so for our honorable mentions, we have 3 honorable mentions. I do want to mention, before we jump into these, that these were all great books. I had problems with them all, but overall, I would highly recommend. These were 4-star ratings. That's where my honorable mentions came from. There are books that are like, oh, these aren't 5 stars, but they're a 4-star. Okay. The first one is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. A lot of people did not like this year. I get it. Alex Stern is not for everybody. It really worked for me. It really did. I liked the world. I like being in a college setting. I like dark academia. I like the magic system with the blood magic. I thought that was all really, really cool and really, really fun, to be honest with you. What else did I like? I enjoyed the writing. Oh my god, the writing here was phenomenal. Yeah, it actually made me like a stan of like Leigh Bardugo. So I can't wait to read everything she's ever written this year, which is one of my goals. So yeah. All right, the next 2 I don't own. It's Winter by Marissa Meyer. This is book 4. I want to preference that I probably read the last 300 pages of this year, which is why it's an honorable mention. Because I didn't really read the beginning of it. I had already read it, I remembered it quite well, and I just jumped in the audiobook where I kind of left off. And I read that 2 years ago, so like it was a questionable choice, but I did it at the beginning of the year. This was like one of the first books I read this year. And I just adore the Lunar Chronicles. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. Some people think they're amazing, some people think they're horrible. So yeah, so that's Winter. I can't really tell you anything about it. So I highly recommend the Lunar Chronicles. So next one is The Deep. I can't remember who wrote this, so the author will be on the cover. And The Deep was an interesting novel. The Deep follows, how do I even explain this? I couldn't even remember how to explain it. It's the problem. I read it in maybe like 2 hours of my time. I got yelled at for doing that. It's read by the person who is a part of Hamilton, if I'm not mistaken, which was great. And it's about these pregnant women who are thrown overboard and die, and then their babies come out to be mermaids, if I'm not mistaken. They're pregnant women in slavery, and it's how slavery is, and you have this one mermaid that holds all of their power and all their secrets and all their information, and how that affects the one person. There's also some other stuff happens. I think overall this book was really well done. I liked the message. I liked the commentary that it brought. But I didn't really like the last third or so. It wasn't my favorite final third, act 3 of a book, but I definitely understood where it was coming from, and I respect the fuck out of it. The other one I just want to very quickly mention, I don't remember what I rated it. And that is The Oingon Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. This is the first book I read of his. I read 2 books of his this year. I'll be continuing on reading more. I do think he's a good writer. I just think he doesn't write everything great. With this one, this follows 4 boys who end up getting attacked by something that happened in their past. It's one of those, they did something horrible 10 years before, now we're seeing the outcome of that 10 years later. This is extremely brutal, so look up your trigger warnings beforehand, but if you can handle it, I think it's worth it. I cried my eyes out in the last, 30 pages or so. So that's my top books of 2020. What were yours? What were your highlights? What are things that you loved? What are the things you hated? Let me know. I will have worst books coming out today as well, so I'll see you guys all then. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.